We humans are surface beings, and it seems normal to us to move about in the air, in full light, with the ground beneath our feet. It was recently found that, on a planetary scale, these conditions are actually a special case. Because, beneath the surface of the world, plunged into the darkness and heat of the great depths, there are phenomenal quantities of living beings that, for a very long time, went unnoticed, and they are called intraterrestrials. These extraordinary organisms, whose fascinating discovery has shaken what we thought we knew about life, they evolve beneath the surface of the continents, as well as under the ocean floor, inside the Earth's crust. And these intraterrestrials? Today, we are even able to map their distribution at great depths, and thus represent the ultimate frontier of life underground. That being said, let's get back to our intraterrestrials, who live buried and entombed in the subsurface of our planet, within what we call the deep biosphere. An environment as hostile as it is astonishing, which truly begins several dozen meters below the surface and sometimes extends for several kilometers in depth. The deep biosphere is not made up of soil, mud, or clay. It begins at the point where the subsurface is no longer enriched by the activity of plants and animals. So, whether on the continents or at the bottom of the oceans, you often have to dig several meters below the surface before you begin to enter this strange world, made at first of extremely compacted sediments that, as you go deeper, transform into almost pure rock, heated by the warmth coming from the center of our planet and subjected to tremendous pressures. And it is there, in these environments plunged into total darkness and devoid of oxygen, that Ove was discovered. Between the tiny spaces that allow water to circulate among the rocks, there are astonishing forms of life, sometimes present in staggering numbers. The first clues that put us on the trail of these intraterrestrials were brought up to the surface during deep oil field exploration campaigns in the 1920s. Some rock samples from these drillings sometimes showed strange signs of unknown microbial activity. But most scientists, who at the time thought it was impossible for life to thrive so deep underground, remained skeptical. They thought these samples were likely contaminated during retrieval. But in the 1980s, with the development of methods that allowed for the complete isolation of samples taken from deep underground, the doubt disappeared, because many deep drillings began to bring up rocks inhabited by microscopic organisms. You don't have to be a biologist to understand the significance of discovering living beings evolving in environments without light or oxygen, subjected to extreme temperatures and pressures, and lacking any supply of organic matter, and where apparently there has been nothing to feed on for millions of years, which is truly mind-blowing. Since the mid-1980s, deep-sea exploration campaigns and the fascinating discoveries they've enabled have multiplied. To explore and understand this deep biosphere, samples of rock have been collected by drilling several thousand meters down, beneath the ocean floor, just like beneath the surface of the continents, and even inside the deepest mines in the world. And almost every time, the extracted rocks, once examined under the microscope, revealed the presence of beings as astonishing and fabulous as they are. Some compacted sedimentary rocks found 500 meters underground contain 10,000 to 100 million living cells per gram of sediment. At 2.5 kilometers deep, beneath the ocean floor, there are sometimes still a few thousand viruses and bacteria in a volume about the size of a teaspoon of these collected rocks. Compared to the tens of billions of microorganisms that can be found in a single teaspoon of healthy soil taken from the surface, this may seem like little, but the space occupied by the deep biosphere is staggering. The total volume of the potential playground for intraterrestrials is estimated at nearly 2 billion cubic kilometers, which is almost twice that of all the oceans. So much so that the combined mass of all the microorganisms living in the cracks and folds of the deep underground literally tips the scales. Scientists from the Deep Carbon Observatory estimate that these living beings, evolving in rocks once considered sterile, represent more than 70% of the planet's microbial biomass. To give you another sense of just how phenomenal the sum of these tiny beings is, just think that on their own, They account for about 15% of the biomass of all living things. If you could, just like magic, pull them out from the crevices where they are and spread them across the surface of our planet, you would end up with a layer of organic matter nearly a meter thick, covering all the continents. Which makes the deep biosphere the largest unexplored reservoir of life on our planet. A reservoir essentially made up of unicellular organisms, whose diversity is such that it could very well be the next rainforest in terms of untapped pharmacopoeia. Because even though, once placed under a microscope, these microorganisms hardly impress anyone but specialists, since they often look like this, they've developed remarkable diverse ways to survive their harsh environment. Many live so deep that they have mastered the art of withstanding pressures that most machines could only tolerate for a fraction of a second. To bear the weight of kilometers of rock above them, which exerts pressures up to 1,000 times greater than those of our atmosphere, they have developed amazingly fluid and flexible cell membranes. But perhaps what is most striking is their ability to feed on things they would never encounter. At the thought of almost all other living beings ingesting, in the depths of the crust, the vast majority of bacteria. Some archaea appear to feed on compacted rocks, or, more precisely, on the rare elements hot water slowly extracts for them as it circulates through thin cracks and microscopic gaps. Depending on the nature of the minerals to nibble on, the depth, the temperature, the acidity, and the salinity of the waters, a whole range of creatures with adaptations as improbable as they are unique has emerged. So much so that inviting them all to dinner would make it hard to create a menu that satisfies everyone. Some microorganisms are particularly fond of munching on rocks like pyrite. Others ingest the hydrogen produced by the reaction between water and olivine, and still others delight in sulfate, nitrate, or hydrogen sulfide. When they don't prefer to feed on serpentine minerals while breathing in iron or manganese oxides. And in this joyful mess, some of the organic matter produced by living beings, able to take advantage of the presence of normally toxic elements, can benefit others. When it spreads into the environment or when organisms die, we've even found creatures deep within the earth that draw their energy from it. From the last thing you'd ever think of putting in your mouth, namely uranium and thorium. This scanning electron microscope image shows purplish rods a few microns long, which are candidatus cells. Disulfuridis odaxviato, this species of bacteria with a name that would make anyone jealous. Terminator was found in a South African gold mine, 2.8 kilometers below the surface. While splashing around in alkaline water heated to 60 deg C, which seeps into the crevices of rocks rich in radioactive elements, Candidatus disulfuridis. Odaxviator does not feed directly on uranium and thorium, but spends its entire existence nearby, greedily absorbing the elements formed by the radioactive decay that constantly occurs in its environment. In short, if an intraterrestrial invites you to dinner, don't go. You're a surface species, a being of light. And ingesting even just a small spoonful of almost any of the substances they are fond of would instantly make you regret being born. Even though most of the organisms brought up from the deep biosphere are unicellular, exceptionally, we sometimes come across multicellular ones like fungi. Occasionally even animals like the unusual one on the screen. In the Kopanang gold mine in South Africa, nematode worms have even been found at the depth of 1,400 meters, which, although they are only a few millimeters long, are the giants of the Earth's crust, the largest creatures that have so far been found more than a kilometer below the surface. And all this incredible diversity has only been observed where we've dug over the past 40 years. Our understanding of the deep biosphere comes from just a few hundred drillings at most. Despite the planet's size, this small number of windows has already shown something is hidden. Hidden under our feet and ocean floors is a vast unknown part of Earth's life. And I don't know about you, but for me, there's a question I really want to dig into. When does it stop? Is there an insurmountable boundary, a depth limit beyond which no trace of life can be found? Until now. Everywhere we've dug, the observation is the same. The density of living things decreases in the samples as we go deeper, because with depth, the conditions become more complicated. As the rocks get more compact, less space is left for water to circulate. So, in this increasingly dry environment, the available dissolved nutrients become more and more scarce. And above all, as we go deeper into the depths of our planet, the temperature keeps rising, because the heat coming from the core, which is rich in radioactive elements that sank there during its formation, spreads some of the accumulated energy to the layers above it. However, we believe that no form of life is able to survive in conditions where the temperature exceeds 120 degrees Celsius, because beyond that, all organic molecules forming living beings break down. It becomes fascinating. By assuming that 120 degrees Celsius is an insurmountable limit, we've been able to create a map of the distribution of the deep biosphere. A map of the ultimate frontier, of the presence of life underground that you are looking at right now. On this map, you can see that life is present at greater depths beneath the continents than beneath the oceans. The reason for this is that as you go deeper underground, the temperature increases by about 50 degrees per kilometer beneath the ocean floor, whereas it only rises by 25 degrees per kilometer. In the continental crust, this difference comes from the fact that oceanic crusts are only 6 to 7 kilometers thick, compared to 30 to 70 kilometers for those that make up the continents. Much thinner and made up of basaltic rocks, oceanic crusts conduct heat more efficiently and therefore diffuse energy more effectively, rising up from very great depths. The areas on the map that are colored white and blue correspond to the oldest regions on the surface of our planet. Stable for hundreds of millions of years, they've cooled, and at their depth, temperatures may rise by under 10 degrees Celsius per kilometer. That's where you can hope to find living organisms buried down to nearly 10,000 meters deep. In the orange and red zones, the underground heats up much more quickly, and no form of life should be able to thrive there beyond just a few kilometers deep, at most. Finally, in certain very active tectonic zones or ocean ridges that are located right above magma pockets close to the surface, the colors are red, scarlet, because that's where the temperatures reach infernal levels the fastest. To sum up, remember this. It's believed that no form of life could have developed beyond 4 kilo below the ocean floor and probably 10 kilo beneath the continents. These are the maximum depths at which we have found life so far. Traces of organic matter, such as amino acids and biopolymers, which are believed to have been synthesized by living beings. Surprisingly, the available volume for the development of a deep biosphere on Earth increases over time because inexorably the core of our planet is cooling. If we could have drilled into the Earth's ground 1 billion years ago, we would find that the temperature increased more rapidly than it does now. So the maximum habitable depth at that time was much closer to the surface. So, in 4 billion years, when the Sun has turned into a red giant and all forms of life on the surface have become impossible, the intraterrestrials will remain buried beneath the Earth's surface, with a much larger volume of rock available for them to develop in than there is today. These life forms should be the last to vanish, the last to be carbonized by the Sun's heat. And then, beyond their resilience and diversity, what is impressive about intraterrestrials is their slowness and their longevity. Many of the microorganisms from the great depths are very different from their surface cousins, in the sense that their metabolism has slowed down extremely to the point where it sometimes seems to have gone into pause. It has been observed that in the first few dozen meters below the surface, the rates of cellular life decrease by 2 to 3 orders of magnitude. And this slowing down of living beings, which is one of the keys to surviving in these environments, continues to be confirmed. As we go deeper, almost all living beings evolving at great depths break down the molecules around them to produce energy 10,000 to 1 million times more slowly than their distant surface relatives. Among the inhabitants below, dividing a cell once per millennium makes you one of the most active beings in Earth's depths. To cope with the lack of resources, Some organisms even seem to have stopped reproducing. After switching to minimal life mode, they slowly repair their damaged parts at a relaxed geological pace. Even more astonishing, in some deep soil samples, dormant cells have been found, organisms that are completely inactive or have such a slow metabolism that researchers are starting to wonder whether they should be considered something alive or just not dead. Like a seed waiting to sprout, these intraterrestrials seem to be waiting for conditions to improve so they can reactivate. And thanks to a meteorite impact, an earthquake, or a sudden opening, new cracks allow some appetizing elements to circulate nearby. They come out of their slumber. Think about it the next time the earth shakes. It can be a dangerous threat for surface dwellers and a boon for those living in the depths. Just as strange, it seems there is no limit to the length of their slumber. Recently, Japanese researchers brought up samples taken from an isolated pocket of rock more than 2 kilometers below the surface of the ocean floor. And in them, they found thousands of microorganisms that had been trapped there without any activity for 100 million years. And when the researchers placed these intraterrestrials in a bath rich in organic matter, they came out of their slumber, worthy of the dawn of time, and began to reproduce and repair themselves again. And then there is a puzzle that fascinates the scientific community, perhaps the most mysterious of all. How on earth did these organisms manage to go down so deep? A few years ago, a team of researchers made a puzzling discovery by sequencing the DNA of intraterrestrials taken from inside a coal deposit buried 2 kilometers beneath the floor of the Pacific Ocean. They realized that these are genetically closer to the microorganisms that live in the soils of our forests than to other species of the deep biosphere. Evolving in other rocks located just a few meters from the coal deposit, it is believed that the explanation comes from the fact that these microorganisms we found are descended from species that originally evolved in the soils of primary forests. And when these forests decomposed and then, over time, were transformed into coal during their burial and compression, the microorganisms that depended on them for survival followed them down into the great depths. Along the way, they developed ingenious ways to keep feeding on them. Even though the mystery of the origin of the intraterrestrials found in deep coal or hydrocarbon deposits seems to have been solved. In almost all other cases, we don't know how living beings managed to get there. Some discoveries even seem to make no sense at all. For example, strangely similar microorganisms have been found in 3 deep geological sites scattered across the planet. One is in the Atlantic, another in the Indian Ocean, and the last in New Caledonia. And it's hard to understand how living beings sharing so many similarities could have emerged in deep layers that are several thousand kilometers apart from each other. Can some intraterrestrials occasionally be transported by the current? Or do they only move by following the slow movement of water that barely seeps through the underground? We don't know. In general, to explain the original origin of intraterrestrials, 2 hypotheses are in conflict. The first suggests that these deep organisms all descend from surface-dwelling living beings, and that over the billions of years of life on our planet, they have colonized the Earth's depths by following the slow movement of water that manages to seep in. The second, bolder and more controversial, tells us that they might be there because they've practically always been there. Maybe the very first forms of life on Earth formed inside, and that some of this life then migrated toward the sun and found ways to adapt to surface conditions. Whatever the right answer is, the discovery of these unique beings has added new branches and offshoots to the great tree of life. Branches that have existed on Earth for billions of years and that, until very recently, had never been noticed. Maybe even similar beings are currently hiding in the subsurface of other planets, where they are quietly feeding on minerals. The next time you hear someone say that there's nothing amazing left to discover on Earth, remind them that below, there's a realm vaster than the one on the surface. And it's populated by tiny beings that we've barely even touched. Also give them a trowel, or even better, a drilling platform.